Benimaru, Diablo, Zijin, the three contenders for the strongest among Rimuru's subordinates. That relationship would continue on for a long time to come. Watching Benimaru and the others, there were some who let out a sigh. Oh my. Benimaru, was it? With my brother's sword in hand, it looks like you could fight me on equal footing, or perhaps even better. Velgrin lamented, brushing back her blue hair. Half of her statement was modesty, but the other half was serious. Benimaru's growth was abnormal. He was halfway to becoming a true dragon. Suspecting Rimuru had done something, Velgrin gave some serious thought to what would happen if she were to fight a serious Benimaru. It was a troubling question. She might win, or she might lose. The conclusion was that they were essentially equal. If Benimaru did not wield Artha, the blade of prosperity, Velgrin would be the victor. That was certain. However, the fact that a weapon could bring him to her level of strength was a shock to her. Ha, you are fine just the way you are. After all, Grun, your sword, is me. Rudra was naturally wooing the woman he loved in such a manner, but his voice leaked directly to his host, Masayuki. Perhaps thanks to Rudra's manifestation, Masayuki could properly perceive the suspended world. Because of that, he was currently dying of embarrassment. Oh my. Rudra. The fact that Velgrin looked so happy was another reason Masayuki was writhing in agony. Stop it, just stop it already. This is definitely going to get me teased later. He screamed this internally, but it reached no one. Besides, this isn't the time to be flirting, is it? You were furious earlier, saying you were going to kill Cornu over there, but is that just water under the bridge now? He's so whimsical, Masayuki thought. Well, since Velgrin herself seemed indifferent about it, Rudra's anger likely didn't last, but they were ignoring the issue a bit too much. Seeing Feldway and the others arrive and apparently start trying to persuade Cornu, Rudra probably lost the will to fight. But even so, Masayuki's opinion was that they should properly settle things. In short, stop flirting and clean up your mess. That said, he could understand why Rudra lost interest in Cornu. This Cornu guy, he's a bad person, but also not a bad person, I guess. No, he's a bad person, but he displayed such a lack of common sense that it hinted at poor upbringing by his allies, like Feldway. If he were a villain to the core, that would be one thing, but it felt more like a child acting tough. The way he got ticked off so easily made him seem small-time, and strangely enough, it made it hard to hate him. Well, in my case, since they can't actually hurt me right now, I can afford to look down from a safe distance like this. Still, Masayuki decided it was best to wait and see. As for Cornu, he was currently too shocked to speak, his eyes following Benimaru and the others. Cornu had only lost consciousness for a brief moment. Therefore, the moment he opened his eyes, Benimaru was already delivering the finishing blow to Jahal. The fact that Jahal had been cut to pieces was incomprehensible to Cornu. He hadn't been able to follow Benimaru's sword strokes with his eyes. No, seriously, just what is he? Finally, he understands the reality of the situation, Feldway thought. Do you finally understand why we were trying to reason with you? Even to Feldway, Jahal was an enemy to be abhorred. Vega, whom Feldway had begun to open up to, had finally been revived, only to be killed again before they could exchange a single word. Even if death was the only salvation for him, it was Jahal's actions that caused it. If he had postponed persuading Cornu and cooperated with Vega instead, perhaps their fates would have been different. However, for Feldway, Cornu was also a precious comrade. Up until now, I have been a little too self-centered. A little. Hey now, stop glorifying yourself in your own head. The peanut gallery of Bear and Celerio was noisy, but Feldway ignored them completely. That is why I swear that from now on, I will cherish my comrades. Lord Feldway. Will you follow me, Cornu? Of course. If you'll have me, I'd be delighted. Feldway's persuasion was successful. Cornu would cast aside his grudge against Velgrin and the others, leading to a reconciliation. Or rather, the cost-benefit analysis realizing that refusing here would mean making enemies of Benimaru and his group as well kicked in, allowing him to make the correct decision. Abera and Celerio said nothing more, watching over them with lukewarm gazes. And so, the stage returns to the site of the final battle. Veldanava was perplexed. Perhaps because of this, he was struggling to analyze the situation. It was unavoidable, really. Just as he thought his beloved Lucia had returned from the land of the dead, Ivarage had chosen the worst possible moment to resume its activity. Moreover, Ivarage's target was Veldanava. No. Ivarage had set his sights on Lucia's soul, which Veldanava was cradling so protectively. Kayahahahaj, love is wonderful. Let's become one, okay? Then we'll be happy. Everyone will be happy. Ivarage was hideous. Even though it wore Lucia's appearance, its interior was repulsive. No. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But Lucia I love was. Even if he gathered Lucia's fragments and molded them into a single form, it could hardly be called the genuine article. Only now did Veldanava finally realize his mistake. You are foolish, Velda. But I am the cause of your madness. Because I died, I led you astray. No, you aren't to blame at all, Veldanava wanted to scream. He wanted to say that he was the one at fault, not Lucia. However, he had no leeway left to do so. Ivarage was already closing in, right before him. In Ivarage's hand was memory. In contrast, Veldanava held Cornu. Ivarage slashed at Veldanava as if trying to steal his love. It intended to kill him, devour him, and become one with him again. This was by no means evil. To Ivarage, it was an act of justice. To Veldanava as well, this was the providence of the world and the truth. The world is cruel, yet it provides everything. That is the world Veldanava created. Veldanava could not endure the loneliness of being the omnipotent one. Therefore, he created the world to distract himself from his boredom. In the process, his siblings the true dragons, who shared the same origin as him, were born. With the true dragons numbering 4, the chaotic world stabilized. Order was established. He created the 7 primordial angels to manage this. Laws were defined for the stable world, and the cardinal world became solidified. Although Veldanava was no longer alone, he still could not fill the void in his heart. The world was too immature to replace the omnipotence he had cast aside. Veldanava waited patiently. Slowly, the world began to transform. While indigenous gods were born as incarnations of great power, the divine ancestor, luminous twilight Valentine, was born. With the arrival of the divine ancestor, the world underwent a revolution. From the life that filled the world, intelligent life forms were born. And then, after a long time, humanity was finally born as a vessel for the soul, existing to act freely and assert their will freely. Veldanava rejoiced. To Veldanava, who had been bored in a world of nothingness, simply watching the activities of life was enjoyable. The activities of the creatures called humans were even moving, to the point that Veldanava dreamed of becoming a member of their world. However, there were problems. Humans, having acquired intelligence, stimulated one another and took unpredictable actions. If left unchecked, they would immediately fight amongst themselves and start down the path of self-destruction. Several worlds had been born, derived from the cardinal world, but similar trends were confirmed in all of them. The cause was emotion. He had given them wisdom, desire, and emotions because he thought they were necessary for humans to develop further. Yet, emotions that grew too large tended to reject the assertions of others. Conflicts arose when principles and definitions of what one considered right differed. Rather than discussing things rationally, there were more cases where they clashed, proclaiming only their own righteousness in fits of anger. This was because their fundamental assertions were, to them, absolutely non-negotiable justice. Veldanava thought. He decided he would accept these phenomena as a necessary evil to some extent, and tolerate the state of the world as a training ground for souls. If he managed humans completely, conflict would likely disappear. However, that would mean individual emotions would no longer fluctuate. It would become a dystopia world without stimulation, where free will does not exist, even if it were equal and fair. That would be similar to when he was alone. Such a world was not what Veldanava desired. Since then, he made adjustments countless times, attempting to help humanity develop into the ideal form. He finally altered conditions in numerous parallel dimensions, causing them to undergo different evolutions. He and the others cooperated in this. Just as shadows arise where there is light, the 7 primordial demons were born in correspondence to the 7 primordial angels. He was their leader and the strongest among them. Since they were not beings Veldanava created directly, he could not order the primordials. He helped him because he had formed a friendship with Veldanava. It wasn't just he. Veldanava had other collaborators. Naturally occurring gods like Dagrul and Ramers. Using those indigenous gods as a reference, he gave birth to the divine ancestor, luminous twilight Valentine. Created as a new life form possessing a physical body, he used his capable intellect to assist Veldanava. With their cooperation, the ideal environment was finally completed. A system of eternal recurrence was constructed, so that souls would circulate through all dimensions. Thus, each world would go on to develop in a wide variety of ways. Just when everything began to work well, the wheel of fate turned massively. Veldanava met Lucia and knew love. They loved each other, and Milim was conceived within Lucia. The moment Milim was born, Veldanava lost all his power. However, such a fact was trivial. After all, Veldanava loved this world, and he wished for his daughter, Milim, to grow up safely and healthily. Just as he ordained it should be for all life forms, he wished for his own daughter, Milim, to surpass her parents. Therefore, even if all his authority was lost, Veldanava was not troubled. There should have been no problem at all. It was beyond Veldanava's imagination that there would be base fools who would slay a god-like existence that had lost all power and become a mere man, boasting that they had achieved god-killing. It was a gross misunderstanding, but the responsibility for allowing total freedom of thought lay with Veldanava. And when that assassin's blade reached even his beloved Lucia, doubt arose within Veldanava. Was I really right? With Veldanava gone, the world seemed poised to lose its order. However, thanks to the efforts of the mediators led by Guy, a barely acceptable state was maintained. A god being slain by man is an impossible story. Or perhaps, it was due to the compelling force of the world. By the nature of the system, God's love must be poured out equally. Yet, because Veldanava loved a specific individual, it is possible an error occurred. The weakening of God was proof of this, and also the cause of God's hesitation. If so, it would mean he shouldn't love anyone, but Veldanava's conflicted thoughts told him that would be meaningless. The constructed system judged Lucia's existence to be harmful. Therefore, if a backlash-called force arose and eliminated Veldanava and Lucia, then the world needed to be returned to zero and reconstructed. That was the conclusion Veldanava had reached, but it seemed that this line of thinking might have been fundamentally wrong. Kayaha. The evil smile was filled with pure malice. The act itself was not evil, but it was the ultimate selfishness, with absolutely no consideration for others. Veldanava had tolerated it. Since the result was the current situation, one could say he reaped what he sowed. Swords crossed. In that instant, Ivarage sneered. I love you. Together forever. Forever and ever together. What will you say? Ah. What spread from Ivarage was a bottomless nihility. In its battle with Guy, Ivarage had learned the terrifying soul gluttony, and made it its own. Desire clung to Veldanava. They possessed material, hollow bodies. Once they embraced you, they would never let go. Like love. This is what living feels like, right? Veldanava was being swallowed up. Entangled in muddy desire, escape was impossible. Veldanava tried to pull away from Ivarage, but he understood that it was impossible. This was not mere absorption. It was a compelling force of things that were originally one trying to return to their original state. Veldanava realized he could no longer escape. And I had finally reunited with Lucia. No matter how much he regretted it, there was no way out. It's alright, Velda. You are not alone. Ah, I've dragged you into this again. Yufufu, I don't mind. I was able to see how Milim has grown, so I have no regrets. Saying she was satisfied with fulfilling her role of connecting to the next generation, Lucia smiled. To soothe Veldanava, who was still distressed even after hearing that, Lucia spoke gently. The heart is a fickle thing. But you know, I loved you, and I love you now. That feeling will never change. No matter how many times I am reborn, surely. Ah, that's right, Veldanava answered. It is the same for me. Just Lucia being there made him feel fulfilled. That is love. And the crystallization of that is Milim. Why did I forget that? It was something so important. Veldanava felt a strange sensation. He had neglected Milim, who was so precious. He couldn't believe his own actions, but it was an undeniable reality. He could only think he had gone mad, but returning to his senses now was too late. This moment was his divine punishment. This too might be the compelling force of the world. Veldanava thought this and mocked himself for reaping what he sowed. As a result of hating loneliness and persisting in his selfishness, he caused trouble for the countless worlds he created and became the source of their total destruction. Though he dreamed of a world where everyone could live happily, he was arriving at an end that scattered misfortune and despair. Everything was his own mistake. He had no choice but to admit it, and Veldanava lamented. It's not just you who is at fault. Everything was inevitable. Besides, it is not yet time to give up. Veldanava was bewildered. He could not fathom the meaning of what Lucia was saying. Yufufu. The world is cruel, but that's not all it is, right? After all, your heart is so warm. But It's okay. Because we have hope too. Hope. It was a name he had heard just recently. That cheeky slime that stood in his way. That name was. Veldanava suddenly remembered. The conversation he once exchanged with Lucia. Dear, what should we name this child? Asked that, Veldanava had answered feeling blissful. Let's see, how about Milim? Or perhaps. Why had he forgotten? That time, yes, it was before Milim was born. Veldanava had certainly spoken one other name. Now that he remembered it, he was convinced that everything was inevitable. I see surpassing the parent had already been achieved. While on the verge of being assimilated by Ivarage, Veldanava felt enveloped in happiness once again. Veldanava was no longer lonely. His heart was fulfilled. His power continued to be absorbed by Ivarage, but he felt nothing. Yin and yang. As if holding hands with Lucia, he curled up smaller and smaller.